Welcome to Grace Baptist Church, Bloomingdale, Georgia, for those of you who are attending through YouTube. This is Sunday school, and we're going through a series on the origin, matters of origin, speaking about the beginnings, and we've been looking mainly so far at the book of Genesis for obvious reasons. That's the book of origins. That's what Genesis means. We've covered quite a bit of ground so far. This is part 6. As I always say, if anybody has any questions, if I'm not clear on anything, or just feel free to speak up. So I'm not going to recap the whole series. This is part 6, but just briefly what we touched on last week. Talked about through most of the days of creation, day 1 through day 6. The first day was God created light and separated day and the night by means of light. Day 2, God made a firmament in the midst of the water, separated the waters above the earth from the waters below the earth and under the heaven. Day 3 was separation of earth and seas and the creation of plant life. Day 4 was the creation of sun, moon, and the stars. Day 5, the sea creatures and the birds. And day 6 was land creatures. And then we talked about the day age theory, the idea that each of these days represent long periods of time. And we pointed out why that was not tenable, not biblical, and not substantiated from the Scripture for several reasons, and also pointed out how the order of creation in the account of Genesis is very different from a natural development based on a natural development based on the laws of nature that as we know them right now, that it was just developed by evolution or Big Bang and then evolution. It wouldn't work, and mainly because the sun and the moon is not in place until after plant lives are created. And we started talking about time. The question was, when was the heaven and earth created? When was our universe created? And we're all familiar with the Big Bang theory, which postulates 14 billion years, which is a little bit different than Genesis, which shows a day, 6 days, morning and night, and then has a chronology. We looked at that in Genesis chapter 5 and Genesis chapter 11. It shows not only the generations, the sons and the sons and the sons and the son of the sons, but also at how old each person was when they had their first offspring, who was the continued generation on which they counted. So it gives us an exact chronology and timeline by giving the time of the birth of each subsequent generation related to the preceding generation. So that's what I was trying to say. All right, so today we're gonna talk about the creation of man, and also, as time allows, we may talk a little bit about the laws of nature. But before we do any of those two, I just want to finish up here on the time of creation, and it relates a little bit to the question about whether or not we live in a geocentric universe or not. Geocentric meaning that the earth is the world, the globe is at the center of everything. And I looked up some things concerning that, and as you probably know, there's no explicit verse or anything that's really solid and really unquestionable in the Scripture saying that yes, earth is at the very center of the universe. That's something that can be inferred or interpreted, but it's not necessarily biblical, and that's my take on it. I tend to believe that it is. The earth is at the center, but there's there's different thoughts about it, and say where the scriptures are not totally clear, and I'm not going to be dogmatic. But one thing we know, the earth is unique. That's very clear. I found it, when it comes to the age of the earth and the age of the universe, a common argument against a young earth is the fact that we see light from galaxies and stars that are millions of light years away, meaning that would have taken millions of years for the light to get here. That's the claim, but that's not as a solid argument as people think. If they don't understand the nature of light, not everything. Maybe we talked about that earlier too. The light is not as the physics and the specifics of light is not as intuitive as people think. Is actually kind of strange, and that's what that's where Einstein brought a lot of clarity to it. Well, I say clarity because most of us are still confused, but he did show forth some things, and that's actually been proven too, relating to relativity and how that space and time are related, and the fact that speed of light is an absolute that can't be exceeded as far as we know. There's some people that claim that, but that's still kind of iffy. There's no established consensus that anything can exceed the speed of light. So that's the convention anyway, and what the theory of relativity shows is that if anything that has weight, any mass, any substance will approach the speed of light, their mass will approach infinity. So you'll be infinitely heavy if you start coming close to the speed of light. So that's why nothing that's solid that has matter like atoms and stuff like that could travel that fast. Only light can. And light is it's energy, but it's not matter. But one thing I was pointing out, and this is really interesting. Two things about light. One thing is the speed of light is absolute, no matter where you are and how you're traveling. It's not dependent on your traveling. Give an example. If I'm driving from here back to Savannah, and Mike Watson, he's really late for church, or he's coming to church while I'm going back. So we're meeting each other on Highway 80. Now, I'm going 50 miles an hour in one direction, he's going 50 miles an hour in the other direction. So relative to each other, well, how fast are we going? How fast are we approaching each other? About 100 miles an hour, right? Because it'd be like me approaching Mike Watson is like I'm driving 100 miles an hour relative to him. If I cross the median and we crash, then I would have the impact of something hitting a wall or hitting something at 100 miles an hour, because that's our relative motion to each other. And that's with everything else. If I'm running down the street and Jeremy's running ahead of me, and he's running a little bit faster, or I'm running a little faster, I'm catching up on him. But relative to him, I'm running really slow, but I'm running a little bit faster, even though both of us may be running fast, but I'm just a little bit faster, so I'm just approaching him slowly. So there's a slow speed of us, between us. So I mean, that may be obvious, I'm stating this, but with light, it doesn't work like that. If you see somebody, running or driving or something, or of course we can't be anywhere close to the speed of light, but if we could see the speed of light, it would have no relation to how fast that person is traveling. The light would be, if that person is emitting light, I'm running with a flashlight like that. So that light should be going faster if I'm going in the direction of that where I'm pointing to the flashlight, but it doesn't. It's the same way. Even if I'm going the other direction, back, the light is still going the same speed. It doesn't make sense, but it's reality, and we can't explain that. But Einstein explained that. So that shows a little bit about the difficulty when you try to measure light. Or use light as a clock for for the universe, and saying, well, these objects, they're moving, so far away, and it took so long for them to get there. We don't know that. Another thing, and I'm not going to stay too long on these all the technical issues, but I just want to point out these two things. The second thing is that you can't measure light in one direction. There's no way. There's no physical possibility for us to measure light, because in measuring, we're going to be moving objects, or we're going to have communicate in a way where we're going to impact our results by what we're doing. That's the best way to put it. So the only way to measure light is to measure two ways. Have something to mirror it. That's how they did when they did measure light the first time. He did it against a mountain wall. This was hundreds of years ago. He measured light against a mountain wall miles away, and was able to get a reflection back on something that he emitted. I guess it was at night. And then he had a cogwheel moving really fast with small cogs. He was able to see the cut of the received light, a receptor cell of some sort, so to see how this cogwheel had moved between the light was emitted and came back. So we was able to measure light. But that's the only way, back and forth. So we can only measure light in two directions, which means that scientifically we don't know if the light is going the same way in both directions. And people say, why would it be different? Well, we don't know. Maybe it's not, but we don't know that. It is a possibility if the universe is expanding or things are moving in the universe, and we don't know how, we don't know the full extent of the universe, so we don't know everything about light as far as how it travels. It could be that it has one speed in one direction, and then it's instantaneously back. So it takes some time for the light to get here to there, go to the outer part of the universe, but it got less time or no time to come back. Einstein, when he knew this, when he made this theory, he said that we stipulate that the speed of light is the same in all directions. He said we do not hypothesize or assume that it is, because we don't know. We just stipulate it. We just to help our model, to help to understand what we're doing, to make it easy for the calculations. But we have no idea. So that's another thing. There's just a couple of things to point out, that there's no absolute proof or anywhere close to a proof of the age of the Earth based on the light that we see from far away distances. All right. Sorry, it took a little bit long on there, but that's just something about light and the age of the Earth. I had a couple of back to and that relates to the fact of the Earth being whether or not the Earth is in the center. Now when I read this also, I read an article about dark energy, which is a little bit kind of questionable concept. But have you ever heard of antimatter? That's a physical concept. No, that's actually, it sounds kind of weird. It's science fiction, but it's actually true. It's nothing questionable about it. It can be observed and detected. It's not that easily, but it is. But it's basically the same thing as charges. We have positive charges and negative charges. Same thing with matter. There's an antimatter, which has properties that are opposite of physical matter, the normal matter that we know more about. But it's observable. And there's a problem with the Big Bang theory is that there's several problems with it. But one thing that's been a mystery is that according to the Big Bang, there should be an equal amount of matter and antimatter, but there's not. There's a whole lot more matter than antimatter, and so there's an asymmetry in the universe, and that also relates back to the thing about the speed of light. If there's an asymmetry in the matter and antimatter, then there's really no solid ground to say that the light is equal in all directions, or the speed of light is equal in all directions. So one more thing here on the centricity of the Earth, and this is a good article. I'm not going to read through it, but I'm going to, if you want to look at it, I'm going to pass it around and leave it out here. But it's just going to give a good little bit of history on what people thought, and going back to the old Greeks and Aristotle and all that. Their ideas of gravity, which was not not very well founded. But you heard about Copernicus when he made a model of the solar system, about the orbits of the planets around the sun. And then the Kepler came, and he kind of really put it into equations. Copernicus thought it was all circular, but Kepler showed it was elliptical, and he kind of really put laws in place that actually work for the motions of the planets around the sun. And then Newton came, and he came up with the law of gravity based on that. He used that, was part of his, that led him to discover the law of gravity. So that when the people in general thought that the Earth was geocentric, the Earth was the center of the universe, and then people said, no, the sun is the center of the universe. But then realized the sun is not absolute either. We talked about that. The sun, Earth rotates against the sun, but the sun is not standing still either. It's like a hammer throw. You kind of the thrower, he moves around too by the weight of the hammers he's throwing as they rotate against each other. So there's nothing that's fixed. But then in modern science, then there's more discoveries that point to and question what is the center? Is there a center of the universe? And if so, how is the Earth is the center of it? This is definitely not saying anything showing that the Earth is not in the center of the universe. But this article points out there's no necessity biblically why it has to be in the center of the universe. But it could be, like I said, you could kind of come to that conclusion based on some things the Bible says, but I don't think that's really anything solid. But what is solid is the fact that the Earth is unique. It has a central place as far as God's purposes. There's no doubt about that. And like I said, personally, I believe it is, if not absolute center, it's very close to the center of the universe. And there's also some modern findings about that shows why. Let me just quote something real quick here.
I understand you're saying that the Scripture doesn't show that the world is the center of the universe. You say there's no conclusive evidence.
There's no explicit claim
no explicit verse.
Right, not that I know of. If you know one.
But as you said, as a whole, it doesn't talk about any other planet other than Earth, and where He's coming back to reign, and where He loves, His love is. It's all centered to the Earth.
Right. It's centered as far as God's purposes, but I'm talking about physically centered.
Is there any other purpose than God's purpose? No.
No, it's no other purpose, but I'm not talking about purpose. I'm talking about physical location. The physical location of the...
That doesn't make sense. In the Bible, it's all of God's attention is the earth.
Mm-hmm.
We're not told of any other planet being created, how it's created, just this one.
Mm-hmm.
Just the earth.
Right.
For God so loved the world. And when we read that, we read this world.
Mm-hmm.
No other world.
Agree.
I was thinking so when you read chapter 1, verses 14 to verses 15, doesn't that kind of, it doesn't say specifically, but doesn't that show that the earth, everything else is created around the earth to shine light upon the earth when it says that? What do you think about that? And God gave them in the firmament of the heavens, verse 17, to give light upon the earth. Right. Mm-hmm. So when I read those verses, I know what you're saying, but I'm not reading those.
I know there's not a specific one verse that says the earth is the center, but that's like a lot of verses. There's no verse that says, thou shalt not smoke. Mm-hmm. There's no, right. Thou shalt not do that. There's no specifics, but the whole idea points to the specific attention that the earth is the center of God's attention, therefore universe, because like you said, the sun, moon, the star, it's all for the earth.
That leads me to believe that there is. I believe there is in the center of the universe, but I'm not 100% sure of that, because it's again.
You just said you believe it is. Now you're not 100% sure.
Well, I believe in the sense that I lean towards that. If I had said, if I had to make
Well, given the state of science today, I wouldn't lean toward anything scientifically, not today.
Well, no, I mean, actually, scientifically, there's the indication also that showing that if there's a center of the universe, a physical center, then the Earth looks like the Earth might be very close to it. But the thing is, the Genesis, the Bible don't show us where's the extent of the universe. God hasn't given us that. And if we don't know the extent of the universe, we don't know the location. I mean, is it significant, the location, exact location of the, what if the universe is not we think of it as a ball. There's nothing saying the universe is a ball. There's like a bowl of, ball of space. There's no, so there's,
Inclusively say that Earth is the focal point, God's intention.
absolutely. Yeah.
I see what you're saying, the physical location don't have to be.
Right.
Yeah.
Just like
Well, for me, it's like, I mean, does that have, I mean, that never really, I never thought the universe was a bowl around.
Right.
I thought it was so expanded that we wouldn't comprehend, it's like comprehending everything God made.
Right. We don't even know about the extent, how the extent looks like.
All I think that what he wants us to focus on is what he focused on. And that's, as far as when it's describing the earth, this earth, this planet, and everything, and like Rich said, it's the focal point. And everything else, of course, is just speculation.
Yeah, and that's, that kind of brings it to a good point. It's not that, except we don't know what the extents of the universe look like, and we don't need to know it. And I don't think we can know it. So it's almost like the physical location is almost not relevant. We talked about before that the fact that, we discussed the flat earth. The flat earth is based on, like many things we humans do, we come up with that, we read things and we come up with our own ideas, we envision things, but they're very limited and very, often failing because we're humans. So that's the man's thing, we like to have things fixed, set, so we can comprehend it, organized. We like time. We have a problem with time. You go see somebody you haven't seen for years and oh man, look at your kids grew up. Time, but we can't get used to the fact that time changes. God created us for eternity, but because of sin, we have a limited time here. We're temporary. We're going so we try to fix things, make it absolute and no changing. But as we say, everything in this universe is moving, as far as we know, physically. The planets are moving, the sun is moving, the galaxies are moving. God is the only one not moving.
Only thing I would say was like man and his, kind of like proof that there is no God.
Yeah.
It's always, I think that's so much for space exploration and everything else. It's to disprove maybe that we are the center. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
And there's something else out there that we just don't know about. Therefore, if we can find it, we can disprove everything the Bible says, because the Bible, like we say, it doesn't take exact verse, but it infers that this is the center. But if we can get out here and find that this is not the center, and there's other places of life, hence we found water, life, wherever, on wherever Mars, wherever it was, hence water means life, then we can disprove the Bible.
Yeah, and that's why they like to see the Earth. We're just a little planet spinning around the sun in a galaxy among many galaxies. We're just here. So when they're finding stuff that kind of point toward the centrality, somebody called it to escape, like the Hubble. Heard of the Hubble telescope? And when he made it says interesting creation. If it was a special place close to the center that the Earth is, it would be exceedingly improbable on a chance basis. If it was just based on chance. The fact that they have actually find things here that points toward that we may be close at or close to the center. They put in, it says here, the Hubble. Edwin Hubble himself remarked that he added a term to an equation to escape the horror of a unique position. So the fact that we would be in the center, that's so statistically impossible that we gotta make something in the presentation of our equation to give the disclaimer that it's not.
Look at Job 26:7. I think that may clarity.
Yeah, the earth hangs on nothing.
He said he stretches out the north over the empty place and hanging the earth
Up on north, yeah, well,
down.
it doesn't,
We know God resides in the north, you know, the scriptures, so
Right.
the location is not,
yeah, God,
doesn't
God,
have to be center located, it doesn't have to be. But
What verse is that? What was that?
Job 26:7.
26:7.
Oh, we went over that.
Oh, I can just read one sentence here if anybody interested. There's also strong evidence from quantized redshifts of galactic clusters. And redshifts is, what they measure distances to the stars with, indicating that the galaxies are evenly spaced spherical shells around the Milky Way galaxy. So we're in the Milky Way, and the Milky Way seems to be centered. Earth appears to be within 100,000 light years of the universe, or the center of the universe. That sounds a lot, but it's not a whole lot compared, because it's like a.
But again, if we don't know where
Well,
we don't know the center of the universe, he's making that statement, appears to be the center of the universe. That
was based on a model that, the conventional model. So I mean, it's all, there's nothing conclusive.
yeah, theoretical.
Right. But the fact is that if there's nothing conclusive, then it's a scary thought to people think that we are centered.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's why people try to avoid that. Another thing that people use for dating, saying that we have an old Earth, an old universe, is the radiometric dating. I think I mentioned about that. The half-life of radioisotopes, which some of you may be familiar, remember it from high school, or talking about that. But that, with radioactivity, there's a very precise half-life where the unstable portions of an element, when it decays, it does that at a very fixed rate. It's very exact. You can measure things very exactly by that. And based on that, they say, well, some of the rock, the igneous rock, that which was created by volcanic activity, by measuring how much of the radioactive or the unstable isotope of that material, they can deduce or calculate how old that is. But because of the relationship with the unstable and the stable isotope of that element. But the problem is that you have to make an assumption on what was that proportion to begin with. Now we can do it with, you heard about carbon-14.
Yeah.
That's easy to make that, because all living matter has a certain percentage of carbon-14, which is unstable, and carbon-12. Carbon-12 is only 12 protons, or had 12 protons, and then 14 neutrons, which makes it, that's the unstable portion. Anyway, it decays, it falls apart, and becomes other elements. So that's the whole idea of radioactivity. But carbon-14 is easy because all living matter, once it's live, it has a certain proportion, and when it dies, it starts decaying at a certain rate. So that's how you can calculate, how long they can, find something in Egypt and say, okay, this part carbon-14, this died 2,000 years ago. But that only works on a short time scale, and because after 100,000 years, there's no more carbon-14. Shouldn't be. The problem in that, by the way, when they look at fossils, they find carbon-14 in it and try to come up with that. Well, how do we find carbon-14? Stuff that's supposed to be millions of years old. But so the same thing. But with rocks, it's not like that. You can't. They have certain reasons why they come up with ideas why they make assumption on what proportion should be. But those have failed because, and a good example, you remember the eruption of Mount Helen in 1980 was in Washington State? Well, that's a fresh magma. It's created as igneous rock that's only about 40 years or 50 years old, or 40 years old. So we should be able to measure the rock there, the radioactivity, the radiometric dating. It should show 40 years, or it doesn't. It shows like 800,000 years old. So there you go. So anyway, that's another good thing to point out when people try to prove old Earth. So, do we have time left for? Oh, we're almost out of time.
Okay. 5 minutes.
All right, we'll get started here on the creation of man, and they'll continue next time. So we look back to the book of Genesis. We read chapter 1 and all the days of creation up until the last thing we read was let's pick up at verse 24. And God, this is the sixth day. And God said, let the earth bring forth the living creature after his kind. And we talked about kind and the fact of different species, and they procreate within their kind, not outside their kind, ever. Cattle and creeping thing and beasts of the earth after his kind, and it was so. And God made the beasts of the earth after his kind, and cattle after their kind, and everything that creepeth upon the earth after his kind. And God saw that it was good. In verse 26, and God said, let us make man in our image, after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the fowl of the air, and over the cattle, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creepeth upon the earth. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God created he him. Male and female created he them. So it's both. It's not just man. It's man and woman are both created in the image of God, and together they present the image of God. And God blessed them, and God said unto them, be fruitful and multiply, and replenish the earth, and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the fowl of the air, and over every living thing that moveth upon the earth. And God said, behold, I have given you every herb bearing seed, which is upon the face of all the earth, and every tree, and in the which is the fruit of the tree yielding seed. To you it shall be for meat. Let me stop right there. But that was the sixth day. So then there's in chapter 2, there's another account. And there's a little bit different. And we're going to see here that next time we'll look at that. But we see that the first account, Genesis 1, it's earth-centered. Everything in chapter 1 revolves around and talking about being centered. That's definitely the center of that chapter. And the purpose of God is the earth, as the habitation of man. But in chapter 2, there's another creation account, but there man is the center of the whole. Just like the Gospels, Matthew showing that Jesus Christ is the King of the Jews. Mark shows him as a servant, and Luke is the Son of Man. John is the Son of God. It has different emphasis. Same thing with the Genesis chapter 1 and 2, and we'll take a look at that, because otherwise, if you don't see that, you may have a little bit of confusion regarding the chronology of the sequence of events. But one thing is for sure here, man is definitely unique and different from animals. There was no animal that God told that he was going to make them in his own image. And there was no animal that God gave in charge of the whole earth to have dominion over it. We're going to see that God had a special calling for them. He didn't have a calling for the other animals. They had a purpose for them, but he had a calling for man to have dominion. Well, let me take that back. He did have a calling for the other animals, but they were to multiply, be fruitful and multiply. So yeah, I think I'm correct myself there. But he did not put the animals in charge. He put the man in charge, and man was created in God's image. And we're going to see also in chapter 2 that God not only did he put him in charge with special calling, he also gave him a free will from the very beginning. And man wasn't destined, he wasn't predestined to eat of the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good. He made that choice. And also we see that God made man accountable. We never see anything of God holding animals accountable for sin, or even an animal even sinning. Now animals suffer the consequence of sin, but there's man that's the guilty one. And so the Bible is abundantly clear about the specific, the uniqueness of man relating to anything else created, which also shows the relationship that God has with man. He has a purpose, he has a calling, he's put him in charge, he's an image, he's to glorify God, but he also has a relationship with God. He has a free will, he has accountability. And since we're about almost out of time, we've got 2 more minutes, but I'm going to look at something, we'll come back to that. The question is, why did he create man then? And I think we looked at it before. We'll look at Colossians chapter 1. I hope I'm pulling these up right. Well, this is a general statement. For who is the image of, talking about Christ, who is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn of every creature. For by him were all things created that are in heaven and that are on earth, visible and invisible, whether they be thrones or dominions or principalities or powers. All things were created by him and for him. And he is before all things, and by him all things consist. So that he created it for himself. But here we also see, because of man, God took upon himself the form of man. He didn't take upon himself the form of any other creature. So that's another thing. Shows the man's uniqueness. Because he created his image, and he came and he died for mankind. He died for the sins of every man. Revelation chapter 4 also, this is regarding the purpose of it all. Revelation chapter 4 verse 11. Thou art worthy, O Lord, to receive glory and honor and power, for thou hast created all things, and for thy pleasure they are and were created. So even though we're unique, we fall under these verses. We're created for the purpose of God, for him, and for his purpose, for his pleasure. All right. Next time we'll continue here talking about man, the creation of man. The second account in 2 is going to show some things, and also I'm going to talk about a little about the arguments that man was not created in the image of God, but he came from apes and monkeys, and we're going to look into about the genetics of that. It's very interesting, and also to totally debunk the idea that there's any kind of proof or evidence that we should come from monkeys. Even though we don't have to have any evidence, we know from the Scripture that's not the case. But for those who try to point to it, because there's been some misconception that has been clarified, but not everybody knows about it. So we will look at that. So, all right, we'll take a break.